Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin Sinise.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 44, Cerritos Strong. We'll start off with some Star Trek news, and then we'll talk about the Season 2 finale of Star Trek Lower Decks, First Contact.
Then we'll get into our audience question right after our main topic, Cerritos Strong. We're going to be talking about Season 2 of Lower Decks and how much stronger this series has gotten. We'll have a lot of things to talk about. Hope you enjoy it. Season 2's done, sir.
It is. 10 weeks goes by awful fast, doesn't it?
It does. It's not the end of our Season 2, thankfully, but the end of Lower Decks Season 2.
Our Season 2 is really just getting started.
Our Season 2, we don't even know when our Season 2 is going to end.
we may just be in perpetual season.
Yeah, it's
from here on out.
It's all up to Paramount Plus. We can be stuck.
We're just scaling that mountain of entertainment week after week after week.
That's right. Kirk is climbing a mountain. Why is he climbing a mountain? Because
you've seen. I take it the YouTube video Shatner of the Mount or something like that.
Oh yes. I love it.
That is the funniest thing. Oh well,
it's great. Oh man, well, I hear through the subspace grapevine that you have some Star Trek news for us.
I do have some Star Trek news. I read Brent Spiner's new novel. Well, he calls it a memoir. It's called Fan Fiction, a memoir inspired by true events, and it is apparently a largely fictional, but some things in it are true, story of Brent Spiner in '91, while he was at the height of playing Data on TNG, being stalked by a fan.
Oh, wow.
And so in the book version of this reality, things go big and over the top, funny and dramatic, and you don't know exactly what parts are real and what aren't, although I have my guesses. But if you go to the book expecting for it to be a kind of it's not like William Shatner or Leonard Nimoy's memoirs or any actors from the other casts. This is a novel, and he says in the book, in the introduction, okay, all I've told you in this first few pages is absolutely true, but from here on out, I'm not making any claims. But it's inspired. And I can remember watching him in that documentary Trekkies from '99 or so.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about somebody who was really, really obsessed with him. And there's traces of that in here. But clearly he's taken some real events and invented some others and has spun them all into a kind of detective noir story. And it's ludicrous at points. It's laugh out loud funny at points. There's also some very serious things in it. I think Spiner's relationship to his dad probably really is troubled, or was his stepfather, I should say. And I should say really was troubled, and that comes out some in the book. And there's some serious meditations on what celebrity means and what it does to both the star and their fans. And there's some meditations on life and death. But on the whole, it's a very fun romp of a read. And I intend to review it at some length later. But the other day on Twitter, I tweeted out in response to somebody else, "Oh, that's a great book. I read it in 2 days. Wonderful read." And Brent Spiner saw it and liked the tweet. Like, my brush with it's ironic. My brush with greatness, Brent Spiner liking my tweet. But it's ironic because it's this book about the various degrees to which fans are obsessed with their favorite stars. Right. And I got all worked up for a few minutes. Oh, Brent Spiner liked my tweet. What should I do to follow up? But of course you shouldn't do anything to follow up. He only liked your tweet. But he thanked me by name for reading his book. So anyway, I do heartily recommend it to fans of Star Trek, to fans of detective fiction, because it's not a serious work of detective fiction, but it plays with the tropes, and it's a lot of fun. And anybody who's interested in getting even a skewed through a fictional lens look at what life as a working actor in Hollywood is like, I think you'd enjoy it too. So highly recommended.
Well, and I was going to say there too that you were selling yourself a little bit short, that he didn't just like your tweet, he did reply to it. And
he
I
did
think
reply to me by
he said
name.
like, thanks very much, Mike, or something like that. So
Yeah, so
that's pretty
yeah,
cool.
that's pretty cool.
That's awesome. We got some likes for our tweets from Doug Jones a while back. We tagged Doug Jones in a couple of tweets.
That's very good. Yes,
that was cool.
He's very cool. He's probably of the Discovery cast. I'd like to meet any of them, of course, but he's one I'd especially enjoy meeting.
I would too. I've admired him for a long time. So when he showed up, when he was going to be in Star Trek, I was like, yes, please.
And what had you? I'm sure I've seen him in. I know I've seen him in some things, but I only found that out after the fact. What did you know and admire him from before Discovery?
What I primarily knew him from was the Hellboy movies.
Okay,
he played Abe Sapien.
Abe Sapien, yeah.
Yeah, and he also played in Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. He played the Silver Surfer.
Yes, and I like that movie a lot.
You know what? I don't remember how much I liked the movie, but I thought he gave a great performance.
He gives a great performance. And at the time, I was just excited that there was a superhero movie that was PG, and I could watch it with my son, who wasn't yet 13.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So all the fans online were like, "Oh, what is this? They're going to dumb it down, make it a PG Fantastic Four movie." But I was like, "This is great," because my kid and I were reading old Jack Kirby and Stan Lee Fantastic Four stories, and it just came for us right at the right time. So
that's awesome.
But yeah, Doug Jones is wonderful as the Silver Surfer. He's just the embodiment of physical grace. The things he does with his body to embody a character are really amazing.
Well, and he was also in the Shape of Water and and Hocus Pocus. He played the Scarecrow guy in Hocus Pocus, and a lot of other
my
things.
Disgrace list of things I've never seen.
Yeah, me too. But
well,
I know,
you're talking like you've seen it.
I've seen some of it. I'm just saying what he's famous for. I've seen some of him in it, and but anyway, this is not about Doug Jones. This is supposed to be about Brent Spiner, who's also really great. He has that. Brent Spiner has those mime instincts.
Yes.
And so he's of course always put that to good use in his work as Data. And I will say also that my recommendation, now sound unheard, but my recommendation for people would be, if you're going to engage this book and you like audiobooks, check out the audiobook of this memoir, because or TNG cast members return.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got performances from I know Michael Dorn, and I think most of the people from TNG are on this
every
thing.
TNG cast member,
pretty much every cast member,
is in there, and also
of the main seven.
Right, everyone that's mentioned in the book. Will Wheaton's off the show or not off the show, but he's not. I don't know that Will Wheaton's. He's mentioned in the book a few times, but I don't think he's a character who takes an active part. But every character, every actor who is in the book as a character is in the audiobook, including Jeannie Francis, Mrs. Jonathan Frakes. So
nice.
Yeah.
Aww.
Yeah, I'd like to listen to that too. I bet it's a lot of fun.
Yep. So
he thanks them in the acknowledgments for letting him include them, so they must all be on board with whatever. And he said in an earlier interview earlier this year that they're all heightened versions of themselves in his novel. But they must approve, because they all came on board to do it. So,
well, Frakes is used to playing a heightened version of himself in Lower Decks.
That's for sure.
Which we got to see a lot more of this season. We'll talk about that later in the episode. But we're going to start the episode with our discussion of this week's past and last season finale episode of Lower Decks, First Contact. Tell me your first impressions, or
my first impression was, oh my gosh. I had just said on one of our most recent episodes that I think it was Wage Douche was the Star Trekkiest Star Trek story Lower Decks has done. Well, they totally went above and beyond that bar with First Contact. I was absolutely at the point in which the Cerritos was towing the the big new fancy starship whose name escapes me just this moment.
Yeah, yeah.
When they were towing it out of danger and the music was swelling and it was like it felt like this just could be an animated episode of one of the other series because it was Star Trek heroism at its finest.
Absolutely.
And from start to finish, it was engaging and funny and mostly though action. We've established, you and I and David also, I think, not we believe Lower Decks is real Star Trek, but this really felt like real Star Trek at a whole new level to me, if that makes sense, without ceasing to be Lower Decks. And maybe it's my conception of what is real Star Trek continues to grow, but I think it was they really just dug deep into the ethos of Star Trek with this episode. Captain Freeman gives the inspirational speech, and it's a crazy plan that just might work, and everybody has to pull together to pull it off. And I thought this was a one. Last 3 weeks, I've said after every one, best episode yet.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I agree. And I mean, this has to be my favorite of the season, and easily. But of course, they warned us of this. They said that at the end of the season was gonna get better and better. And man, the stakes that they're able to raise in this episode, and as usual with Lower Decks, the amount of things that they're able to squeeze into 25 minutes is incredible, and that it doesn't feel rushed at all.
Not at all.
It's absolutely great. And I thought it was so brilliantly clever that they came up with a plot device that forced them to remove the outer hull of the ship. We have never seen that before in Star Trek. That was huge and so cool and so just so creative and original and unique. It's always interesting in Star Trek when you have not only an interesting challenge that comes at our crew, but a really unusual and challenging way that they have to meet that problem, and solve that problem. And this is one of the most creative, one of the most high stakes, one of the
epic.
Most
it really is.
Epic things I've ever seen in Star Trek.
Yeah.
I mean, just having to do that to the ship. I was so afraid though, when that last panel wasn't coming off. I was so afraid that they were going to kill the engineer.
Oh, I know. I thought several characters might die at certain points because
they've
shown they're not afraid to do it. Now, granted, Shax came back, but still, I could see Lower Decks doing that and making it stick the next time around. Like maybe it was all sort of some master plan to lull us into thinking, none of these Star Trek characters will ever stay dead or be gone. And they teased at the beginning of the episode, Captain Gomez, wonderful return of a TNG small character, but saying, you're gonna face some tearful farewells, and I thought, are they telegraphing?
And
they
didn't
had
think
the
about
bit with
that.
Armus in one episode, so planting our memories of Tasha's death in our minds, and in the episode where they were going through all the simulations, one of them was Star Trek 3, where they had to, that was all the aftermath of the death of Spock. I thought, maybe they've been dropping these breadcrumbs we're supposed to be noticing. I was looking at it more like a Doctor Who season than a Star Trek season. But
still, that's
so. I thought maybe Captain Freeman might die. I thought maybe Boimler might die. I couldn't really think they'd get rid of Boimler, but I could see them maybe, with the way Mariner and Freeman's relationship has been up and down over the 2 seasons, and with her, she was going to go transfer off the ship anyway. I could have seen them taking. I'm glad they didn't go that direction. Don't misunderstand.
Me too.
But I could have seen it happening.
Wow, I see. That's a really deep read, sir. I didn't even get.
It's probably too deep. It is too deep because they didn't do it.
Well, I think that's brilliant, and that would have been interesting. But you're right. I mean, that theme has come up a lot this season, even just with at the beginning. Well, we're not talking about the whole season yet. We'll talk about the whole season later. But yeah, that's really interesting. We'll have to get back to that. The sort of the way the season has unfolded. But and the one thing I was really afraid of was Billups. I was really afraid that Billups was going to die.
I could have
especially
seen them doing
because
that too, yeah.
I'm a little bit conditioned from Star Trek Discovery that whenever we have a character who's hung around for a while but we haven't really gotten to know them, as soon as we get to know them, they die.
Yeah.
So I was kind of afraid. Oh no, they only had that Billups focused episode to make it hurt more when they killed him. But thankfully that didn't happen. But I loved the stakes of the episode. I loved the things that the characters had to overcome to meet the challenge. The personal issues that they had to overcome,
Right.
the pride that they had to get past. Especially, there's always that push and pull in the relationship with Mariner and Freeman. And I talked last episode about how this is a repeating pattern in relationships that we kind of constantly have to often resolve the same issues over and over within a relationship. And I think Mariner and Freeman are a really, really good example of that this season.
Yeah.
That they have really kind of cycled through, coming up against some of the same flaws and faults, and coming up against some of the same challenges, and then returning to the same truths about their relationship, and that's been really nice to see. And I think it really came to a culmination this season, this episode. And I loved seeing Freeman too, just really laying into her, laying into Mariner in a way that we don't always see her do, and is a little more reminiscent really of the way she was in season 1. And to see Beckett just really pushing back against that, and understandably so, very understandably so, and yet they had to come back to both of them, each of them admitting their faults, and each of them forgiving the other, which is so often what has to happen. No matter how much in the right we feel like we are,
right?
We often owe the other person an apology, even if because you can be right about something and you can be wrong in the way you handle it.
Absolutely.
And that very much happened with Freeman and Mariner this episode.
Yep.
What else did you enjoy about this episode?
I enjoyed seeing cetacean ops.
Yes,
We've been hearing about times here and there in TNG and in Lower Decks, and now we've got it.
I don't know if it was mentioned canonically in TNG. It was certainly planned.
I read from a blogger who I respect on such things that Geordi mentioned it in some episode in the 3rd season. It didn't it didn't occur to me offhand, but I take him at his word. I have not researched it, so. Well,
they've mentioned cetacean ops since the first episode of Lower Decks, or no, maybe the 2nd episode is when they first mentioned cetacean ops. And so it's always been kind of out there, in existence, and so it's so cool.
I'm going to go to Memory Alpha and see what I can find.
Okay.
Oh, okay. A line in The Perfect Mate in which Geordi LaForge mentions dolphins on board may have alluded to the existence of the facility.
Okay. There we go. All right.
And apparently, some people heard. In background chatter in yesterday's Enterprise, something that the subtitles said was station ops. Apparently, some people heard that as cetacean ops.
Cetacean ops.
It's not clear if the subtitles or the people were right, though. Anyway, so what did you think about finally getting to see cetacean ops?
I thought it was great. I thought that was so cool that they would even have that.
It's a brilliant concept,
right? Especially since all of us
because we know from Star Trek 4 that sea life is as intelligent, or some of it is anyway, and more intelligent perhaps than we are. So it makes sense that Starfleet would enlist and recruit the cetaceans to be part of a mission.
Right. And of course, we all learned the word cetacean from Star Trek 4. None of us would know that word otherwise.
I'm certainly in that way.
But I love the two dolphins kind of bickering with each other.
I would love for it to be revealed that Jillian Taylor got cetacean ops to be a thing in Starfleet.
Yes.
Because we never heard about it until... after Kirk's era. So maybe that's part of Dr. Taylor's legacy when she came forward to the future.
Oh, very nice. That would be very cool. I'd love to see that. That'd be awesome. What about the other thing that I really liked also was Rutherford and Tendi again.
Yes. That was so sweet that he'd been
beautiful.
backing up his memories of her 3 times over, but it was hogging up too much space in his hard drive.
Oh, that was so sweet. Oh my gosh.
And that gave them a chance to do a very literal visualization of a problem that ran throughout the episode of people not having all the information they needed. Right? Because at the very beginning, Mariner overhears her mother, Captain Freeman, talking about the transfer, and so she goes and blabs about it before she knows it's not official. And Tendi overhears Dr. Ta'ana saying, yeah, she doesn't belong in sickbay, and she assumes the worst, that she's being not just transferred out of sickbay, but transferred off the Cerritos entirely, and she goes and tells Rutherford, and then Rutherford checks, and the only reason he doesn't see her name on the list is because the 404 error messages are blocking his view. And so it was this social commentary, but in this very soft and comedic way of, you don't go spouting off before you have all the facts, before you've done some digging and some fact checking and some checking with people who actually know, But I love how they visualized that in Rutherford's ever increasing number of pop-up alerts.
Right. Well, and I think, that is so relevant to our age of communication.
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing is, one of the things we often talk about in Star Trek, I mean, this is a bit of a sideline, but one of the things we often talk about in Star Trek, or I often talk about, and that I think is a Star Trek theme, is that our technological development should never outpace our moral development. Like, if we don't have the moral fortitude to use technology well, then when we get out ahead of ourselves in developing technology we don't know how to use ethically, we don't know how to use well, we will get ourselves in a lot of trouble.
Yep.
And I think that's happened in the explosion of the information age. We have embraced communication technologies, which are good things in many, many respects, but technology has moved so quickly and developed so fast that we haven't really been able to cultivate the habits we need to use them in healthy ways in time to keep up with a lot of the changes and a lot of the new media and things. So that's something I think a lot of us are having to learn. And you're right. I think the episode really kind of functions on that premise and that idea of people operating on too little information, jumping to conclusions, making assumptions. And again, that's something we've seen in this season too. But yeah, and I loved this story between Rutherford and Tendi because, they have that moment in the little Jeffries tube area where they're like, and Tendi's like, well, I don't care what anybody says. I love the Cerritos. I know you're not supposed to get too attached to your ships, but I love the Cerritos. I don't want to leave. And Rutherford's like, I love the Cerritos too. I always have. And it's so funny because between any other two characters who have had the sort of back and forth that Sam and Devana have since season 1, this would be the time when they confess their love for each other. Right. But what they do is they confess to each other their love for the ship. Yep. And then embrace. And that's always how they come together as characters. It's never about... I mean, it is. The undercurrent, the subtext is that they deeply care about each other. They very much love each other. But they always express that through their mutual love of science and nerdiness and technology and the Cerritos. And, of course, that love shows itself, again, in an appropriately technological fashion when Rutherford has been saving his memories of Tendi in triplicate.
Yeah,
it's so adorable.
If I lose those memories again?
Yeah. It's That's wonderful. It's so sweet.
Speaking of a lost memory, though, we get this.
Yeah.
There's a plot to be had here with Rutherford that we're, I guess, going to find out about more in season 3. That his implant was not a voluntary enhancement as he believes it was.
Apparently,
we have
not.
this kind of Wolverine, Weapon X kind of moment where
Right.
you get a glimpse of nefarious scientists implanting his implant. So that's tantalizing.
And Lower Decks functions on such a storytelling level, or in such a storytelling fashion, that we can have that moment stuck in there, and Sam can just kind of go, I think I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. And then we just move on with the episode.
That's right.
Like,
that's right.
Many other series, that would have been like the B plot or something of the story.
Yeah.
And instead, it's just this little breadcrumb on the trail that's left out there for us, and we'll just have to see next season, what comes of that. It's really cool, and it's exciting. I love that. I just enjoy that very much. And there's, this sort of fast-paced storytelling can feel very rushed, but it generally does not in Lower Decks, and that was a great example of that. But again, just a really great episode, really brilliantly written, really tightly written, lots of details in there that all intertwine and just create a really fascinating story. And then we have the shocking conclusion. Of that
it's a season-ending cliffhanger in the grandest tradition of 90s era Star Trek.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought when it was ending. I was like, yes, a proper cliffhanger.
Yeah.
This is great. Now you're really ending the season like a real Star Trek show. That was great. I loved it. And Freeman, they could have called this one, but
that would have been a good alternate title. And of course it's the Klingons with their manufactured evidence again. It's got to be. I mean,
maybe, I don't know.
They didn't explicitly say that. I watched it and thought that's what they had said, but I went back to watch that scene, and no, the Starfleet admiral doesn't exactly say we got this from the Klingons, but it reminded me of Star Trek 4 with the ambassador presenting the it's not doctored footage, but it's footage in the wrong context, which goes again to the theme of misinformation and jumping to conclusions. Apparently, Starfleet has allowed itself to believe that Freeman. Well, at least they're going to investigate. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's again this theme of not having all the facts, not knowing the full truth. Because the scenes they had on screen were scenes from previous episodes of Freeman hanging out with the Packleheads, and I forget what the other scene was at the moment, but you put them together in the wrong way, you come to the wrong conclusion.
Right, and it reminds me of TNG's The Drumhead.
That too.
When Admiral Satie is saying things about Captain Picard which are true, but is drawing conclusions about those things that are not accurate and that paint him in the worst possible light. And we see a lot of that going on in our world today. So
I guess we'll see how Starfleet handles it. Maybe it'll be dispatched up quickly with the first episode of season 3 and doesn't have to go back into Drumhead territory, but we shall see. We shall see. Somebody I read online pointed out that it was ironic that Freeman has been kind of bucking for a promotion all season long, but now once the chance comes, she realizes her place for now is still with the Cerritos and with that crew. Of course, harkens back to all of Riker's hand-wringing over his career throughout TNG, but and I don't mean to dismiss it, because I've been in that place where you don't know if you're where you're supposed to be and doing what you're supposed to be doing. So I don't mean to dismiss it by calling it hand-wringing.
No,
but that
not
vocational uncertainty, that's a theme that Trek has tackled before.
Yeah, definitely. So it's great to see Carol coming to that place of appreciating where she is, having been trying to escape for so long.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important and really good for her character.
I feel like this episode really puts us in a new place regarding the characters, because my recollection of the climactic action sequence at the end is that everybody, our upper decker characters and our lower decker characters, are on the bridge or involved in the action somehow. Boimler's saving the day, by getting that last panel off the hull. It seems like that distinction really, it'll be hard to go back to in quite the same way after this episode. And again, this isn't a drama, it's a comedy, but we've seen that it's a comedy that takes consequences seriously. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, you and David and I, that things that happen matter on this show to some. And so even though there's that constant resetting of personal relationships you've talked about, and I think that's a great insight, in terms of overall plot, things shift. And I can't see how it's going to be possible to, the Cerritos can't be the lovable losers anymore. Like was kind of the premise of the series when it was pitched, right?
Right.
The Starfleet misfits, and aren't they funny? Not after. I mean, yeah, they'll be funny, I'm sure, but I mean, respect to the California class ships and the Cerritos after this thing. It was the Archimedes was the name of Captain Gomez's beautiful new ship, by the way. I love that.
Oh
design.
yeah, that's right.
But I mean, the Cerritos did this incredibly epic, and maybe maybe the rest of the fleet just shrugs it off or something in season 3, and that's more fodder for comedy. I don't know, but I feel like they really have earned their place in the roster of great Starfleet ships after this. I don't know.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what changes as a result, if anything.
I agree. It will be. And on that note, it might be time for us to talk about the scope of this season overall.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think you're coming right there to a really important thing that happens this season, and that has happened in the series overall. It's interesting how, the different Star Trek series are built on different premises. You have the Deep Space Nine, which is the Old West outpost in space, and you have Voyager, where we're untethered from Starfleet, and there's all these sort of like founding premises that that are the impetus for each Star Trek series. And for Lower Decks, I mean, you're very right. It's very much about the lovable losers and this ship where they get all the jobs nobody else wants.
Right.
But I do feel that, you see, you talk about, well, they can't be the lovable losers anymore, or maybe they will, maybe they won't. I think they have to be. I think we start to see the Cerritos, we start to see the crew, in terms of, with a lot more respect at the end of this episode, at the end of this season. And like you said, we start to see them as a real, a real ship and a real crew. And, I was thinking earlier today, like, gosh, I think the Cerritos is a really, really important addition to Star Trek, because it does celebrate this smaller ship.
Yeah.
That's on the missions that nobody else wants, but it shows the importance of that. Mm-hmm. And I think the Cerritos, I don't think it needs to have any more elevated status or any other kinds of jobs, or any kinds of sort of risings in the ranks or upgrades kind of thing. I think that's kind of what Freeman indicates in her, in her decision to stay and not accept the promotion. Yeah. Of course, that decision is taken out of her hands. But I think the strength of the Cerritos is that it's a smaller ship. It's a lesser known ship. So even a lesser known class of ships. And it's doing all the dirty work. And that's why I felt like last episode, that tagline that all the adventure starts in the lower decks.
Right.
I felt like that was like almost like a tagline for the series, a theme for the series. and I like that, and I've loved the sense throughout the series, and particularly in this season. I have loved the sense that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. The lifting up of the downtrodden and the forsaken. You know, I mean, that's something that I think from a Christian perspective we really, really resonate with and we really connect with. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And I think that's true. I think that's a lot of how we feel at the end of this season. That, you know, the ship that Starfleet rejected almost, you know, has become this very important thing. This thing that we can have, this crew and this mission that we can have a lot of respect for, and that we can take a lot of pride in. I mean, I don't know about you, but I found the finale of this season very moving.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
you know, and that. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I don't mean by what I said that I think they'll become like the next Enterprise or something, you know, that suddenly the Cerritos will get a 5-year mission to go explore strange new worlds.
Right.
But I think if only on the Cerritos itself, some of the humor of the series has been people not liking their jobs, which
gotcha.
And that's been, as you've argued, that's been good to see that you know, even in Starfleet, people are dissatisfied and they don't always like their jobs and whatever. But I think some of the series humor has stemmed from the dysfunctionality of the crew and the ship, and
Right.
I guess that will continue. But maybe this fits the pattern of, you know, having to revisit. But it seems like this was an experience that it literally brought the whole crew together, working toward the same goal. They even canceled the ballroom dancing competition for it. So I don't know if, and one reason I found it moving was it felt like something shifted for the Cerritos, and we'll see how much that plays out going forward. Because, and I think if the Christian analog is or not analog, it's not the word I want, but if the Christian theme we can see reflected in this show is the last shall be first, well, that's a reversal that at some point we believe will stick. I've heard some preachers talk about, rather than the world being turned upside down, the world is finally turned right side up when God intervenes, which I think is right, because the world is not the way it should be, and we trust and hope and believe God will set it right in God's good time. Even so, Lord Jesus, quickly come. But so I would hate for Lower Decks to continue to be just lovable losers and the humor all stemming from that. Yes, there's still going to be a Kali-class ship, and as one character said, maybe it was Shari Yin Yim, I don't remember.
Yes, it was.
Most of Starfleet doesn't even know you exist, you know?
Right, yeah.
So that can continue, I suppose, but I'd like to see the Cerritos have that new pride in itself on their own behalf and not just us as viewers feeling it for them, if that makes sense. I feel like something's got to change, and it's not going to be a big shift in the series format, I don't think, but maybe, you know, I was reading one article online arguing that by the third year, lower ranks tend to move up in Star Trek, and I don't know whether that's true or not. I didn't review the evidence myself, but they thought maybe Boimler might get a promotion to lieutenant junior grade or something, you know, and we did see him in the next to last episode taking that young ensign kind of under his wing, and maybe that relationship will continue with Boimler being a mentor, even as he's still fairly low on the Starfleet pecking order. And we're seeing Tendi moving up to science officer training. So I don't know. I appreciate your point, and I wouldn't want to see a big change in series format for it to become suddenly boldly going in a big grand operatic style that we're seeing in Discovery. But I think something's going to change in terms of, I hope, the crew's attitude toward itself and their mission. That what Freeman said in her speech is really going to stick around, you know, and that we find humor and all the other things the show does so well, the Easter eggs and the character interactions, and it doesn't have to be humor in terms of, we're just lowly peons and drudges all the time, you know.
Right. No, and you're right. I think that's absolutely true. I think what we're talking about though is just growth.
Growth,
Which is something we want to see, and we should see. If our characters, we don't want our characters to be static or to be stagnant. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it's a good point about Tendi moving up in the world and all of that we might see these folks. Well, and I kind of likened it in my head to Data sort of living into his humanity more
yeah,
as TNG goes on. It was really interesting. I watched All Good Things the other day, and when Jean-Luc goes back in time and sees first season, first episode Data, he
yeah,
gets this amused smile on his face, because he recognizes this earlier version of
yeah.
Data, who just didn't understand anything and was constantly jabbering and asking questions, and whereas and we see Data become a much more mature character, and yet at the same time, that sense that we feel for him because he can't feel for himself, that stays at the core of his character all the way through his arc, no matter how much he becomes more accustomed to and grows in his own humanity. So I take your point absolutely, and I think you're right, and I hope we see that kind of, and I think we are building up to see that kind of thing happening in Lower Decks, and I'm really looking forward to how these characters grow, how they mature, and whether they rise in rank or not. And what's really interesting too is that we're seeing that they are as skilled and as knowledgeable at what they do as any senior officer is at what they do.
Yeah.
And there's that in I Excretus, when we see the lower deckers and the upper deckers having to switch roles, and Tendi and Freeman have that mutual respect moment at the end of the episode, that shows us that there are things that the lower deckers can do, and that they are adept at and good at their jobs, and that they're becoming experienced, and that they're serious officers, and they have to be good at their jobs, even if their job seems to be something that isn't glamorous or isn't interesting or seems to be low skill. It actually just requires completely different skills.
Yeah.
Some of the same skills, but a different type of skill set than some of the more heroic jobs. And we see that, and as we see that from their perspective, we start to realize that these really are heroic jobs. That the lower positions really are heroic positions, and that they really do contribute to the growth of the whole crew, not just their own growth as people and their own growth as officers.
Well, I think we've referenced before in connection to this angle of the show, 1 Corinthians 12, and Paul talking about the body of Christ has many members and not all serve the same function, and some are fact more dignified than others. We treat some parts with more modesty, etc. But they're all essential, and they're all put together just the way God wants them to be. And throughout Christian history, sometimes that's caused trouble because people with vested interest in continuing to hold on to power and authority say, okay, see, God wants me to be an authority over you. But I don't think that's what Paul's actually getting at. He's getting at reminding that congregation, talk about a dysfunctional group, the Corinthian congregation, but still God was in their midst, and God had brought them together for a divine purpose. And Paul saying, you all need each other. And that's very much the sentiment of Lower Decks, is that the senior officers need the lower deckers, and the lower deckers are growing in their authority and responsibilities and what they can do. And so it's all meant to be the community growing together.
Right.
And while there may be an order, some are clearly in authority over others, they are still a community, and they're all still doing the work they've been given to do. And you can relate that again to different people in the church having gifts differing, and
Right.
not all are called to be pastors or teachers or missionaries or evangelists, whatever. But all are called to love God and love neighbor
Right. Well,
in
and
whatever ways we can
that's
do that.
yeah, and that's absolutely true of lower decks. And you mentioned authority structures. I mean, I was just talking with my son the other day about authority and how we use it, and why we have it, and how it functions and all that. And we were discussing that fact that not everyone is a leader in the sense of being in charge.
Right.
Not everyone can be. You have to have people who aren't leaders.
Right.
But everybody leads in their own sense, in their own way, even leading by example to other followers. Everybody has to do their jobs and do them well. And people in authority, Jesus talks about not lording it over
Right.
others.
Right.
The people in authority have a responsibility to, just like everyone else, treat others as they would want to be treated.
Yeah.
And I think we see a lot of learning that lesson in Lower Decks this season, where people get crossways with one another, and people start disrespecting one another, and sort of the rivalries between Lower Decks and Upper Decks and all that come through, and we start having to level that playing field. And even just in this finale episode, when both Mariner and Freeman have to admit that they were wrong in the way they handled the situation. I think that's really important, that there's mutuality there, and that's such a Pauline idea, of that there's that level ground that we all stand on. There's an equivalency, an equality, if you will, to all of our stations, no matter whether our station is above or below. That there's a unity and an equality that we all share, because we all are on the same journey. We're all part of the same family, part of the same crew, if you will, and we all have the same ultimate goals and the same obligation to the same ultimate authority, the same devotion to the same Lord.
Yeah.
And so we're all under that authority ultimately, and that's what really matters. Those things that mean that we're all on the same journey. And it's interesting, because this episode, this series, and this season could have taken the tack of dismissing the upper deckers, and you'll hear some talk like that in parts of the series and in parts of even this season, to say they're all arrogant, and they're all uppity, and they don't know what they're doing, and they're we're the ones who really make the ship go, right? And while yes, we have pride in what we do, when we do that to the dismissal of others, then we're getting out of balance. And that's the balance that this season in particular I felt kept striking and kept coming back to, that it's not that one part of the ship is better than the other. We're all on the same team, and we all have to work together and make many of the same sacrifices.
Yeah,
and
I think about even in the very first episode this season, Strange Energies. How did Captain Freeman talk down Ransom from his murderous godhood by admitting she had been taking him for granted, right?
Yes.
So yeah. It's the not taking each other for granted. It's appreciating other people for who they are and what they have to offer, and being grateful for that.
Yeah, that idea of honoring one another and honoring one another's uniqueness. That's what's really important about that message, that everyone is special. I think of the movie The Incredibles. When Helen says to Dash, everyone's special, Dash. And Dash just kind of rests his head in his hand and says, which is the same as saying that no one is.
Right.
But that's not actually true. The truth is that everyone is special, Everyone is valuable and does have something to contribute to this world and to this life and to the human community, to the body of Christ, no matter who they are or where they come from. It's just everybody's specialness is different and is unique and comes in ways we don't always recognize.
Yeah, Paul talks about in Romans 12, verse 10, outdo one another in showing honor to each other. That's the only way people are supposed to be excelling and one-upping each other. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I can honor you more than you can honor me. Oh, no, I can honor you more than you can honor me.
Oh, no, after you. No, after you. No, after you.
Well, not descending to that kind of nonsense
No. I'm kidding. But yes, I think that's
insist.
right. But I think that's a really great ethic, that the only thing you should try to be excelling in is appreciating others. We've talked about that on the show, all the way back to the Roddenberry episode this season of our season, where we talked about appreciating each other's differences.
Right.
That's very much what's being talked about there. That honoring of one another and that honoring of differences, and the fact that those differences work together, from the smallest part to the biggest part, from the most obvious part to the least obvious part. You can have beautiful dancing, but you've also got to have mitochondria. So
yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's great. I love that this season of Lower Decks was all about, in many ways, about stake raising.
Yes.
And about scale raising.
For sure.
But not in any kind of cheap sort of way. I remember back in An Embarrassment of Duplers, which at the time was my favorite episode of the series, which I figured would get one up later, which it has. But Embarrassment of Duplers is still a great episode. But they had that fantastic car chase, the dune buggy chase, around the outdoor mall, as it were, and that kind of stuff is fun to have, because it's action packed and it's adventurous, and I love the animation. I love the blending of the 3D animation with the 2D animation. They always do such realistic renderings of the ships, and the vehicles, and I think that is shown so much more in this season. We saw so many more beautiful shots of so many more kinds of vehicles.
Absolutely.
And we see more high stakes adventure and all of that. But the thing that makes it good is that none of that is to the detriment of character development.
Right.
It's all a part of character development. That's what I loved about that chase in Embarrassment of Duplers so much, was that I was enjoying it not just as an action scene. I was enjoying it as a piece of comedy. I laughed through the whole thing both times that I watched it, but I was laughing not just because it was funny, like it was funnier than any chase scene I'd seen, but I was really invested in the characters, and in their progress, and that has been something that has continually happened with Lower Decks, even going back to season 1. We have found ourselves, as we talk about the Lower Decks episode, then we would go on later in the episode to talk about other things, and we'd dig back into Lower Decks.
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, it's like this, and we'd always be talking about the characters and their development, and it's so great that these characters, the ships maybe was 3-dimensional, but the characters really are too. And and I really like that.
The most fleshed out 2-dimensional characters you'll ever see.
Right, exactly.
Well, It's true. I mean, if you had told me when Lower Decks premiered, that it was going to be anything more than just a half hour of Star Trek jokes every week, and maybe I was really afraid laughing at Star Trek as opposed to with Star Trek,
right.
I would have been skeptical. I did not dream it would become what it is, or that I would enjoy it as much as I do.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is it is often a half-hour Star Trek jokes, but it doesn't fail at being everything else at the same time.
Right.
And,
right.
it's interesting that you mentioned that because we have seen episodes like An Embarrassment of Duplers, which have an embarrassment of Easter eggs.
Yeah, yeah.
There's so much stuff in it, and it's constant reference. And that everybody on the Cerritos is a big Star Trek fan, and they all study their own universe. They're nerds for their own universe, and that's great that we see that, and we do have that. But I think we have had that element. It's never detracted from the rest of the story, but I feel like we've had that element less as this season has progressed. I'm thinking about like how many callbacks, how many Easter eggs, whatever, did we have in First Contact? I can think of
we have
very
Sonia
few.
Gomez in the first few seconds.
Right.
I mean, maybe that's more than an Easter egg. She's
right. That's bringing back
captain
a
of
character,
ship, but
right. Which yes is a callback, and that's great. But we don't see a reference a minute as we see in a lot of the other episodes. Is what I'm getting at. But what other callbacks? I mean, cetacean ops.
we see releasing the hull involves releasing maglock clamps. Did I say that right? Maglock clamps, like they do in First Contact, of course, and they're wearing those kind of environmental suits.
And even in Star Trek 4, it's so great that Boimler has to swim underwater, to release
absolutely.
this because it's totally a Star Trek 4 callback, which the whole cetacean ops thing is in itself.
Cetacean ops is a deep cut because it's been in technical schematics for a long time, and lots of fans have been hankering to see cetacean ops, and we finally do.
Right.
We got Dr. Ta'ana not knowing who Jadzia Dax is. that's
That's what I love, because of all the characters, Ta'ana would be the one who doesn't know anything about Star Trek. She would be the one who knows the original
series. She knew Gary Mitchell in episode 1, and she's talking about, no, I mean Spock. Who's Jadzia Dax? And of course, she curses as she says it, which is totally in character.
Yes, it's wonderful.
But I think there were a fair amount of callbacks, but you're right in that they don't detract. They only enhance.
Well, and there aren't as many of them, I think, in an episode like this one. We didn't have near as many
I guess
as we've
that's
had
probably
in some
fair.
other episodes. Yeah. And, not that those callbacks are a bad thing, or like you said, that they ever do detract, but it does show that Lower Decks can stand on its own and not just be a half hour of Star Trek jokes. But at the same time, all those Star Trek jokes and all those references have helped to endear us to the series, endear the series to us, endear the characters to us. And that's worked very effectively in the series' favor. And much more so even this season than last.
Yeah.
And that's what this season has been for me. It's like everything good about season 1, but a lot more of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've loved that. I think it's been great. I remember on Star Trek Day, Mike McMahon was talking about, wondering, well, can we fit all this into 25 minutes? Can we fit all this Star Trek into 25 minutes?
They do.
And they can. Yeah.
Yep.
It's impressive. It's great. What else did we like this season? What else stood out to you, or what criticism do you have? What other thoughts do you have about this season?
Well, there was a lot less of the kind of just crude humor but when it was there, it was there. I'm thinking of episodes like Mugato Gumato, as you've mentioned a few times, although I was personally more disturbed with Where Pleasant Fountains Lie, and again, maybe that's just me, and I haven't gone back to rewatch it after you and David put it in a slightly different light, so we'll see. But I feel like there's been a lot less humor to be embarrassed about this season.
I suppose so. I guess it's been maybe fewer instances, perhaps.
Which I think is now, I get that bawdy, crude humor has its place, and that's part of comedy. So I get that, and some people like it a lot more than I do, of course, and maybe think Lower Decks is gotten too soft or too serious or whatever. But
Right.
but I liked the balance of raunchy humor to non-raunchy humor a lot more this season than I did in the first.
And yet, I feel like some of the things that we saw this season, well, I don't feel like they did. I mean, some of the things we saw this season went further in that regard. Even just the fact that we have more bleeped words in this season. It was a thing that would happen here and there, but we had so many of them just in this past episodes, which at least they're bleeped.
At least they're bleeped, and I guess things like "it's naked time," but again, as we talked about,
Yeah.
context is everything for that sequence. I found that sequence laugh my head off hysterical.
Right. Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some of the like with Dr. Ta'ana, she's bleeped fairly a fair amount, but it
Yes.
fits. It's her character.
It fits, and it's
doesn't bother
funny.
me.
It's always used to good effect. I don't mind it at all, honestly. I don't mind it. I actually like that they bleep. I think that's really
Right, because they would not be obligated to, being a streaming
No, they
service
wouldn't.
that people pay for.
Absolutely not. They wouldn't be obligated to bleep at all, and they don't bleep. In other Star Trek, and but I think it again plays to the way the sort of overall lightness of the series in many ways.
Uh-huh.
And I like that a lot. I find that really endearing and a really fun quality of the series too.
There are times where they could go a lot farther that they choose not to. I'm thinking of the revelation of Tendi's Orion identity, and not her identity, but her social identity, her social role in We'll Always Have Tom Paris. I mean, it's clearly drawing on like dominatrix imagery, but they don't push that. And if you want to think more about that, you're free to, but they don't throw it in your face. They don't push it. It's hinted at, or maybe more than hinted at. But it's not dwelled on, I guess, is what I want to say.
Right.
So it's so I think they do restrain themselves when they would not have to, and I think that's in their favor. Sometimes,
I
other
agree.
times they just go for it.
Yeah, another time, and I don't always go with them. That's one thing.
Right.
That's one thing
And
about
that's
the series.
okay. I've always said, as a Christian, I don't expect entertainment to always adhere to my sense of morality or values, and this is why
Right.
enterprises like the Gospel according to Star Trek are good, because we can sift through what's good, true, and beautiful, as you say, and what isn't.
Well, and
from our
let's
viewpoint.
let's look at that for a second too. I come from a background where it's just sort of assumed that there are things that Christians will watch and there are things that Christians won't watch, and I'm often in circles where it's assumed that that's sort of silly, but really the truth is that it's good to be a discerning viewer.
Yes.
I have a friend who is not watching Lower Decks because they're just like, it's not my thing. It's, they're not necessarily against it or anything.
Yeah.
They're just like, it's just, it doesn't spark joy. It's like, it's
enough.
not their Star Trek. And it's like, you don't have to watch every Star Trek. It's fine.
Right.
If it's
Right.
not your thing, don't watch it. That's cool. But and there are things that are going to make certain people uncomfortable. There are certain things that are going to make other people uncomfortable, and it's going to change, and it's okay. There aren't hard and fast rules for Christians should watch this and shouldn't watch that and what have you. It's about your conscience. It's about your heart. That's another Pauline principle. Very much so. About following your conscience and not violating your own conscience. That in a sense, violating your own conscience is a sin against yourself, if that makes sense. And that causing other people to violate their consciences, right, is causing them to sin. So that Paul will say, something might be permissible for me,
Right.
but it might not be beneficial. Or something might be permissible for me, but it might not be permissible for my friend over there.
Right.
And I shouldn't do what I feel liberty to do around them if I know that it's against their conscience, because I'm making them uncomfortable and I'm setting an example for them that might cause them to violate their own conscience. And he really centers the concept of sin not so much in this idea that God has this list of do's and don'ts, the idea that we get when we think about the Ten Commandments in a certain way. Which is, these are the mystical rules, and if you break them, God will punish you. Instead of these are rules for your flourishing and your goodness in this world.
These are the boundaries within which you can thrive. Yeah.
Right. As Jesus says, the Sabbath is made for people, not people for the Sabbath. It's not, like Gene Roddenberry said, that God is insecure and needs worship every 7 days to feel good about himself.
Yeah.
It's not like that at all. So, by the same token, there are things, and I think that's really good that Paul brings that out, that it's important to know that people are going to have different convictions about what they should and should not do, because people are different and things affect them differently. And being aware of and sensitive to how things affect you personally and what does and does not violate your conscience is really, really important in figuring out what's good and true and beautiful for you to be engaging in. Not that all these things are completely subjective, but it's not like subjectivity does not exist just because objectivity exists.
Right.
So I know, and we've danced around and we've talked around a lot of things in Lower Decks that make us uncomfortable or don't make us uncomfortable, and in some newer Star Trek there's always boundary pushing we've talked about in terms of colorful metaphors and violence and other things like that. One of the things that bothered me about this season early on, in like the first 5 or 6 episodes, every episode there was a mention of butt kicking, but they didn't say butt kicking. They said kicking A. Right?
Yeah, I guess I hadn't noticed, but now that you pointed out,
it was in the dialogue every single episode. At least once, somebody would say something about, "Let's kick some A," When Boimler had his stirring speech, with the red shirts, he'd give this great Star Trek captain speech, then sat down in his chair where they'd replicated the TNG, the Enterprise D bridge so beautifully.
Yes.
Sat down in his chair and then said, "Now let's kick some A." I'm just like, what the heck? And there was one episode where there was like 5 or 6 times they were doing it, and like, why is this showing up so frequently? What is the deal? And it bothered me. I mean, look, I'm a Martin Scorsese fan. I'm not.
You're
really,
not squeamish. Yeah.
I'm not squeamish. I'm not bothered by foul language. Whatever. And but this is Star Trek, and we don't normally use that phrase. And it just struck me wrong, and I just didn't like it. And even in this, and then it stopped. For about the past 4 or 5 episodes, nobody has said it, and I was like, thank goodness. I thought somebody was going to use that phrase every single episode of this season. Like, why are they doing this? It's and they would talk about it as though this is something that Starfleet does. We can have Starfleet values and still kick some A. Like, they'd have lines like that, and it was just like,
that's true.
Why is everybody so obsessed with this? And they left it off, and for the last few episodes, and I was glad for that. But then in the finale, Mariner talks about how she's butt kicking. She actually says butt. But it's just like, wow. And so, and I'm not going to say that burned my virgin ears or something, but there are things you want to see and there are things you don't want to see. There are things you want to hear and things you don't want to hear. Right. Like Mariner wanting to be put out the airlock. It's because she saw all her companions naked. And so it's okay. There's not, there's not a hard and fast rule. There are people who are going to be comfortable with some things. Some things are going to feel in bad taste to some people, and other things are not going to feel in bad taste to other people. Yep. People's tastes, especially in comedy, are different, and it's okay. And so if you're watching Star Trek, if you're watching Lower Decks, you're seeing some of these content issues that we haven't had before, and you're struggling with it, you're worrying about it. It's okay to struggle with those things. It's okay to worry about those things. And if your more progressive Christian friends are telling you, oh, you shouldn't worry about those things, but you do, that's okay. If you feel like you still need to worry about those things, go right ahead. And
Yeah.
if you don't worry about those things, and your more conservative Christian friends are telling you should, but you don't, that's okay too. You have to check your heart, check your conscience, and let that be your guide, and let that quest for the good, the true, the beautiful be your guide, and think about how the things that you view affect you. We talk about this so much with relation to children, but we don't necessarily talk about it with relationship to adults. But it's still an important consideration, and Lower Decks has brought that up for me, more than once. And I think it's important. We've hit these issues several times, especially in this season, and it's okay that people have different perspectives on it, but it's important to wrestle with it.
It might also be, not to sound trite, but it's something to pray about. Not just to
Indeed.
think through, with from the philosophical, but to ask God, should I be worried about this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, forgive me for leaning toward the intellectual.
No, you don't, no, it's not.
I do that.
It's not a criticism of you. It occurred to me that
Yeah. It's a
sometimes
both and
we think
proposition.
some subjects are beneath prayer, but the incarnation shows us God cares about everything.
Yes.
And I suppose on some grand scale of things, what we watch maybe not at the top of the list of prayer joys or concerns, but Jesus says in Luke, your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when it's bad, your body is full of darkness. And I've heard that verse interpreted to mean in the ancient world, the eye was very much a portal or a window through which you could take in good light or not. And so, so what goes in does shape us, as we've talked about that on the podcast before. And there's the other verse about if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out, which is Jesus' hyperbolic way of saying these things do matter.
And that's going further with that, I would say that has to do not just with what you expose yourself to, what you're around, how you look, is another thing. And that speaks to worldview. Worldview is not is the presuppositions and assumptions upon which you function. It is the filter with which you view the world, so that when you take something in, be it media or art or be it experiences, that you go and have, or things that you listen to, like a podcast, or whatever it is, that you do so, you always do so through the lens and through the filter of your worldview. So as you think carefully and think critically about what your worldview is, what you value and what you don't, what you find to be good and true and beautiful, and what you hold on to and what you let go, that affects how you view things and how you hear things. And again, that goes to, it's not just about what you see and what you hear, but how you see and how you hear. And cultivating that is incredibly important. And so that when we talk about these things on the show, I hope we're putting that into action in ways that can help people, both in Lower Decks and in other Star Trek.
Hear, hear.
So overall, I think season 2 of Lower Decks has been a huge improvement over season 1. It's just taken everything, like I said, taken everything good about season 1 and done more of it, made it better. I think the series still has its flaws. It still has its things that are going to make all kinds of viewers uncomfortable, including Christian viewers. But I think the series is worth it. There are certainly things in the series that I don't like, but it's worth it to watch those things and to listen to those things. For me, for the stories that Lower Decks tells, and to see the values, the ideals, and the ethics of Star Trek played out, sometimes in ways we've never seen before, but in very true and very beautiful ways, in very good ways that come at us at another angle. And I think that's really important, that you can use a silly, funny, self-referential cartoon series to still talk about the important things of Star Trek. That was my dearest hope for the series when it was starting, And I have only seen that increase in season 2, and I can't wait for season 3.
Yeah, I don't know when it's coming, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah. Any more thoughts on season 2 before we
No, I'm just
venture forth?
I said at the beginning of season 2 when we were talking about it that I was surprised to find I'd missed the characters since season 1 had ended, because I really hadn't. I watched the end of season 1 and really didn't give it a second thought. But as soon as season 2 got started, I thought, boy, I did miss these characters, and I was surprised by that. So, and now I'm heading out of season 2 knowing I'm going to miss the characters until season 3 starts up. So I hope it comes soon.
Yeah, I do too. I'm looking forward to it even more than I was to season 2. And like you said, yes, I think that's a great point. I think the characters, I love the characters, and they're so endearing to me, and that's ultimately the core of any Star Trek show. It should be the core of any Star Trek show, and whether it's action and adventure, or comedy and mischief, there are all sorts of things that could distract from the characters, and sometimes do distract from the characters. And when it hits right, it doesn't. And for the vast majority of the episodes, that has been true of Lower Decks. And I just can't applaud the series enough. I'm super excited about next season. So
Mischief. Yeah. I like that as a mischievous Trek.
yeah, mischievous Trek. Oh man, that's great. All right, so I guess it's time for an audience question.
Let's get to it. Okay, so our audience question is actually this week supplied by co-host David Atwell, who called our attention to a thread on Reddit that's asking, if gawk is the Klingon food, what is the human equivalent? And actually, the Redditor who posted this question has a suggestion, but let's take that question for ourselves first, Kevin. What's the quintessential human food?
I think it's a bad question.
Well, it is a bad question, and it's only a bad question because Star Trek makes it possible to ask it by treating aliens like monocultures, right?
Well, I agree with that. Well, to a point, I would agree with that. But that's just the thing. Like, there isn't, aliens in Star Trek are monocultures, and we criticize that a lot, and it's been good to expand on that. But at the same time, the way alien species are meant to function, at least in the way Star Trek is originally conceived, is to represent different cultures that one might encounter in the world. Not specific cultures, but differences between cultures. So that instead of, a conversation between, an American and a Zimbabwean, or something like that, we have a conversation between a Romulan and a Klingon, right? And so to a certain point, that's just sort of a narrative function that serves. But we can't. You just talk about a quintessential human food. You can't do that because it depends on what part of the world you're in.
Absolutely.
There are quintessential foods for different cultures. So I don't know. I don't want to dismiss the question completely, but
well, I mean, it's interesting though, because which would you rather have? Which are we more satisfied with at the end of the day? Aliens as kind of allegories, or aliens as fully fleshed out, or not fully, but more fleshed out societies with which our characters engage and can have nuanced interactions? I don't know. That's maybe an episode for another day. But
well, yeah. I mean, now we're getting into.
For what it's worth, the Redditor says he or she nominates pizza. It has, and I thought of that too. He says, he or she says, it has or they. I don't know who posted the question. It has a wide global reach in 2021. Not that this is necessarily a determining factor in Star Trek times, and it is maximally customizable to suit the needs of different cultures. One can easily imagine a Klingon making a pizza with Targ hearts on top, or a Romulan sitting down for presumably some kind of soup pizza. I don't know. Maybe Plomeek pizza is a thing. I don't know.
Plomeek pizza would make more sense.
Then they say also everyone pretty much likes it. However, we don't see a whole lot of pizza being eaten in the shows, I don't think. So perhaps it's fallen out of favor by then, except at Chateau Riker. Bunny corn pizza. I don't know. So they nominated pizza as the quintessential human food, and that had occurred to me this afternoon. I saw David had posted this, and I was thinking, well, what would my answer be? But of course, yeah, you don't want to say one food is more human than another.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree that that's adaptable to various cultures. I mean, that's really true, but so is a salad. You know, you can have a lot of different kinds of salad as well. You know,
maybe bread is the quintessential. I mean, I think a biblical case could be made that bread is the human food.
Well, that's interesting because, you know, I mean, yes, you could say that biblically, but, you know, there were thousands of years of human history before anyone ever cultivated grains. So there is that.
Well, okay, well.
So, you know, I mean, if you go back that far, you know, maybe you would talk about fruits and vegetables, but that's just a pretty wide category of foods. But yeah, I think, you know, breads could, you know, or grains, you know, could sort of be a basic, you know. It's a basic of a lot of foods of a lot of cultures, most foods of most cultures.
Yeah, and the Redditor said, to be clear, I'm not looking for basic stuff like rice, eggs, bread, etc.
Oh, well,
Gok is an iconic dish, the thing everyone thinks of as what Klingons eat. So that's what this Redditor wants, is what humans eat. And
that there again, I just think is so problematic, and I think, you know, you really have to divide it by cultures.
Now, maybe he means in the Star Trek series, and in that case, I might offer up root beer, based on Quark's comparison of root beer to the Federation in Deep Space Nine.
I don't know. I would say it might be tea and coffee, but then we're getting into drinks and not foods so much.
Right. Then that's
so I don't know.
Too basic for this Redditor. So it's an interesting question, but
I'm not sure we can have an
problematic
answer.
on a few levels.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question to discuss in that sense, not because we can answer it very definitively, but because we can't answer it very definitively, and therein lies a point, doesn't it?
And David, when you're next on the show, you've got to tell us what your answer would be. So.
Oh, yeah. That's right. So anyway, well, thanks, Random Redditor, and thanks, David, for
yes,
for submitting the thing from the Random Redditor. And yeah. So I'm excited. Now, Mike, we are on a precipice. We are on the edge of a chasm of unknowing, because next week we have no new Star Trek. What are we going to do next week, Mike?
Well, next week we're going to have a guest with us. And we will be talking, and I will leave that as part of that mystery of unknowing. So you have to tune in next week to find out. But it really, honestly, is a special guest, and we will be observing the spooky season by talking spooky Star Trek.
Very interesting, very cool. I'm looking forward to that. We shall see what we shall see. About
tune in if you dare.
Don't ever do that voice again. No, I'm just kidding.
That's
wonderful.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward. I always enjoy having guests on the show. We haven't been able to have guests very much because Star Trek keeps having episodes. So darn them. But in the meantime, please like, share, rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you can do that. Also, send us your questions. We are at Gospel Trek Pod on Twitter and Instagram. We're Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show. Also, you can support the show by using the support button at anchor.fm/GATST or by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/gospeltrekpodcast. Your support really helps the show, helps us make more content, and also you can get some cool behind the scenes stuff and extra bonus content for yourself as well. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time.
I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin Sinise. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.